This is Aldrich Ames, a senior CIA officer with access to America's most sensitive nuclear intelligence.
A senior officer of the Central Intelligence Agency and his wife are under arrest tonight, accused of spying for the Kremlin for years.
Aldrich Ames had walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington and started selling secrets to the KGB. They paid him a total of $2.7 million.
For 9 years, he systematically betrayed every major U.S. operation behind the Iron Curtain, sending dozens of American agents to their deaths.
Well, the reasons that I did what I did in April of 1985 were personal, banal, and amounted really to kind of greed and folly.
But it wasn't ideology that drove him to treason. It was debt. $50,000 in credit card bills.
Heavily to Rosario. She was the one who was interested in spending money and who liked to live high on the hog. And I think he wanted sort of to buy her love, and the way to buy her love was to get her expensive things.
This ultimately cost the United States billions in damage and compromised America's nuclear security for nearly a decade.
In 1985, we began to lose cases, by which I mean Soviet officials working for us, and some of them disappeared. This led us to believe that something was wrong.
How did a middle-ranking CIA analyst become the most destructive spy in American history? What secrets did he sell? And how many people died because of his greed? In 1985, the Cold War was at its peak. The United States and Soviet Union were locked in an intelligence war that would determine the fate of the world. Nuclear weapons, submarine movements, satellite capabilities, information that could shift the balance of power was worth killing for. At the center of this shadow was the CIA's Soviet division, tasked with penetrating the most secretive intelligence service on Earth, the KGB. Aldrich Rick Ames was a 20-year veteran of this division. Born in Wisconsin to a CIA father, Ames seemed destined for intelligence work. He'd spent years recruiting Soviet diplomats, analyzing intercepted communications, and managing some of America's most valuable human assets behind enemy lines. But by 1985, Ames had a problem. Despite his government salary, he was living far beyond his means. His second wife, Rosario, had expensive tastes, designer clothes, fine dining, luxury cars. The couple was drowning in debt. Credit card bills were piling up. The mortgage was behind. And Ames, with access to some of the most valuable secrets in the world, began to see a solution. What started as a desperate attempt to pay off $50,000 in credit card debt would become the most catastrophic intelligence breach in Cold War history. On April 16, 1985, Ames walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. He told the guard he needed to speak with someone from the KGB. This wasn't unusual. CIA officers occasionally made contact with Soviet intelligence as part of their work, but Ames wasn't there on official business. In his briefcase, he carried the names of 3 Soviet nationals who were secretly working for the CIA. These weren't random contacts. They were carefully selected assets whose exposure wouldn't immediately point back to him. Ames met with Sergei Chuvakin, a Soviet diplomat who was actually a KGB officer. The conversation was brief. Ames handed over the intelligence and asked for $50,000 in return. To the KGB, this seemed almost too good to be true. A senior CIA officer voluntarily walking in and offering secrets? They suspected a trap, but the intelligence checked out. Within weeks, all 3 Soviet assets had disappeared. Some were quietly reassigned, others simply vanished. The KGB realized they had something extraordinary, a genuine CIA mole with access to the highest levels of American intelligence. They were willing to pay handsomely for more. What happened next was systematic destruction of American intelligence operations across the globe. Ames didn't just sell random secrets. He provided the KGB with something far more valuable: the complete structure of CIA operations targeting the Soviet Union.
How much damage did Rick Ames' treason create?
He basically wiped out all the U.S. government's human source collection.
He wiped out your ability to have eyes and ears on the ground.
Exactly.
In our #1 enemy.
Exactly.
In June 1985, he handed over a list containing the names of every Soviet national secretly working for the CIA. This wasn't a partial leak. It was total exposure of America's human intelligence network. The document contained over 20 names, including some of the CIA's most valuable assets. Colonel Oleg Gordievsky, a KGB officer feeding intelligence to Britain and the US, was recalled to Moscow under suspicious circumstances. He barely escaped with his life. Major General Dmitry Polyakov, codenamed Top Hat, had been providing nuclear secrets for over 20 years.
June 13th, 1985, Rick Ames gave the KGB a list of every known human asset the CIA had in the Soviet Union. The list had 20 names on it. Within a year, 10 of those people were executed. Among those rounded up, General Polyakov, seen here in this remarkable footage as he's arrested by Soviet agents and stripped on the spot just in case he had a cyanide pill on him to take his own life. He was later tried in a secret court and shot.
Adolf Tolkachev, an engineer who had given the US detailed information about Soviet radar and aircraft systems, was also caught and executed. For each name on the list, Ames received payment, but this was just the beginning. Over the following months, he systematically betrayed nuclear submarine locations and capabilities, satellite intelligence gathering methods, advanced weapon system specifications, the identities of CIA officers operating under diplomatic cover. The KGB paid him over $4.6 million, far more than the initial $50,000 he'd needed. But the true cost to American security was incalculable. By 1986, CIA headquarters knew something was catastrophically wrong. Assets were being compromised at an unprecedented rate. Operations that had taken years to develop were collapsing overnight. But the human cost was even more devastating. At least 10 people were executed because of information Ames provided. These weren't abstract intelligence statistics. They were individuals who had risked everything to help the United States. Sergei Motorin, a KGB
Back at the CIA, no one knew exactly what had gone wrong, that they'd been betrayed by Aldrich Ames. Sandy Grimes blamed herself.
It's still hard to talk about.
By 1986, the CIA could no longer ignore the pattern. Too many operations were failing. Too many assets were being compromised. They began a mole hunt, a systematic investigation to identify the source of the leaks. The process was methodical and devastating to morale. Everyone with access to the compromised operations became a suspect. The investigation, codenamed Night Mover, focused on a simple question: who had access to all the compromised operations? The list was shorter than expected. Only a handful of people had the clearance and access necessary to cause this level of damage. Ames was on that list, but he wasn't the primary suspect. His colleagues saw him as competent but unremarkable. He didn't fit the profile of a master spy. The investigation dragged on for years. Meanwhile, Ames continued selling secrets. He provided the Soviets with details about US nuclear strategy, satellite capabilities, and ongoing intelligence operations worldwide. In 1989, he was promoted and transferred to Rome. where he had access to CIA operations across Europe. The security breach had been promoted to an even more sensitive position. From Rome, Ames continued his betrayal. He identified CIA officers working under diplomatic cover, compromised ongoing operations, and provided the KGB with detailed assessments of American intelligence capabilities. The damage was compounding. Each piece of intelligence Ames sold made it easier for the Soviets to identify and neutralize other American operations. The breakthrough came in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed. Suddenly, the KGB's meticulous records became available to American intelligence. Soviet defectors began providing details about their intelligence operations. Slowly, a picture emerged of how thoroughly American intelligence had been compromised. But it wasn't until 1992 that investigators got their first real lead. A Soviet defector mentioned a CIA officer who had been providing information for years. The description was vague, but it narrowed the field of suspects. The FBI took over the investigation. They began surveillance of potential suspects, including Ames. What they found was shocking. Ames was making regular bank deposits of thousands of dollars in cash. His lifestyle had grown even more extravagant. He owned multiple properties and expensive cars. But the most damning evidence came from analyzing his travel patterns. Every time Ames traveled, either for work or vacation, suspicious activities followed.
When Grimes and several other agents were assigned to a special task force to investigate the intelligence leaks. Grimes's job was to construct a massive, meticulous database of all of Ames's activities. What the database revealed was that Ames made a series of cash deposits in the bank, each time just hours after meeting with a Russian official. Those meetings were sanctioned by the CIA, so they didn't look suspicious until
operations would be compromised, assets would disappear. The FBI began building a case, but they needed concrete evidence. They couldn't arrest a CIA officer based on circumstantial evidence alone. In 1993, they received authorization to search Ames's house while he was traveling. What they found confirmed their worst fears. Hidden in his home were classified documents he had no legitimate reason to possess. Computer files contained detailed information about ongoing operations. And most damning of all, they found evidence of his communications with Soviet intelligence.
18 months later, as a result of the work done by Grimes and the rest of the task force, Aldrich Ames and his wife were arrested.
How are you feeling?
For Grimes, it was a bittersweet victory. To this day, she is angry about the people Ames betrayed, including General Polyakov.
He knew full well what fate awaited them. And he did it basically for money. He needed money to take care of Rosario. Rick was a weak person. He could not face telling Rosario no.
The evidence against Ames was overwhelming. Bank records showed millions of dollars in unexplained deposits. Surveillance had captured him meeting with Soviet intelligence officers. And documents found in his home proved he had been systematically stealing classified information. Faced with the evidence, Ames confessed, but his confession revealed the true scope of the damage he had caused. For 9 years, he had been the KGB's most valuable asset. He had provided them with information that fundamentally changed the balance of power in the Cold War. The secrets he sold included detailed plans for U.S. nuclear weapon systems, intelligence on American submarine capabilities, the identities of hundreds of CIA officers and assets, information about satellite surveillance capabilities, strategic assessments of American military planning. Ames was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
What I did to those men, the situation of their families and others, and the kind of shame and the kind of remorse that I feel is something that is and I think always will be intensely personal to me.
His wife received a shorter sentence in exchange for her cooperation.
The shock and the outrage. You don't betray your mother, you don't betray your country. You don't betray your wife, you don't betray people. That's the way I feel.
But the damage was done. The Ames case forced a complete overhaul of American intelligence operations. The CIA implemented new security measures, including regular polygraph tests and financial background checks. the FBI took over responsibility for investigating espionage cases involving U.S. intelligence officers. More fundamentally, the case shattered trust within the intelligence community. If a senior CIA officer could betray his country for money, who else might be compromised? The financial cost was estimated in the billions. Entire intelligence programs had to be shut down and rebuilt. Relationships with foreign intelligence services were damaged. Operations that had taken decades to develop were lost forever. But the human cost was incalculable. At least 10 people died because of Ames's betrayal. Countless others had their lives destroyed. Families were torn apart. Careers were ended. Today, Ames remains in federal prison, serving multiple life sentences. He has never expressed genuine remorse for his actions. In interviews, he has attempted to justify his betrayal by claiming he was disillusioned with American foreign policy.
I did the same thing for reasons that I considered sufficient to myself. I gave up the names of some of the same people who had earlier given up others. It's a nasty kind of circle with terrible human costs.
But investigators believe his motivation was purely financial, a man who couldn't control his spending and saw treason as an easy solution. The assumption of trust that once characterized the intelligence community has been replaced by systematic verification. But questions remain. How many other Aldrich Ames are out there? How many intelligence officers might be tempted by foreign money? And how can democratic societies balance security with the civil liberties that make them worth defending? The case serves as a reminder that in the world of espionage, the greatest threats often come from within. A single individual, motivated by greed rather than ideology, can compromise decades of work and cost countless lives. For $50,000 in credit card debt, Aldrich Ames sold out his country, his colleagues, and ultimately his soul. The price of that betrayal is still being paid today. Espionage cases like Aldrich Ames remind us that in the intelligence world, trust is both essential and dangerous. While Ames was motivated by personal greed, history shows that the reasons for betrayal are often more complex. During the same period that Ames was selling American secrets, another intelligence officer was conducting an even more devastating operation from within the FBI itself. But his motivations were far more complicated than simple financial gain.